Check out the Full Press Hockey Podcast with Jim Biringer, the best in the business. It's going to be great.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Full Press NHL Podcast. I'm your host, Jim Biringer. I'm joined by Zig Fracassi. You hear him on Sirius XM Radio on the NHL side with Mick Kern on Under Review every Wednesday. You also hear him on the NFL side doing his thing Sunday and throughout the week with the updates. Zig, welcome back to the program.
Jimmy, it's been a while. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well. Zig, how you doing?
I'm doing okay, especially busy time of the year. Is busy time around the NHL yesterday, especially with the developments going on in Boston. Sorry to see about what happened with Ovechkin and JT Miller in Vancouver. So a whole lot of things going on around the NHL.
Yes, there is a lot to go on around the NHL, and you mentioned it, Boston, Beantown. I think this was a move we saw coming, Jim Montgomery being fired by the Boston Bruins. I want to get your thoughts on the firing, but I also want to look at it. And you made an interesting comment today. I'm in agreement with this. Should we put more of the blame on the general manager for not giving the tools in the toolbox to the coach, or is this a combination of coach and GM?
Very good question. And I would say it's probably a combination. I mean, let's face it. Didn't Parcells say many years ago when he was with the Patriots, if I'm preparing the meal, I should at least buy some of the ingredients? Now, obviously, Jim Montgomery's not going to go out and, maybe advocate, well, I want player X or player Y, although he maybe could make a suggestion to that effect. Truth of the matter is, Jimmy, you as a coach, you've got to be able to press the right buttons at the right time. And it was clear, even from training camp, people I know well in that Bruins organization were telling me that everything was just disjointed. Now, whether that means the Swayman thing was a major distraction, which I think it was, the shuttling of people coming in and out, some injuries from even last year, Marchand needing multiple off-season surgeries. So it just seemed like everything was kind of discombobulated. And then it showed, obviously, throughout long stretches of the season. But then you go back, Jim, to where Don Sweeney and even Cam Neely come into the mix here. You had this roster. You basically signed a lot of one-year minimal free agent deals, and you were able to get away with that with the likes of Shattenkirk and JVR and all that. So the idea was to get faster and stronger. Now, Riley Tufte and Max Jones were failed first-round picks at Colorado and at Anaheim. Maybe they thought, well, a change of scenery, storied franchise gets them going. Quite frankly, it hasn't. And then the free agent signings of Elias Lindholm and Zadorov. Jim, I've been following this team since the Bobby Orr days. This almost smacks of the Bolesky and Backus signings because there's not been a whole lot of production to either one of these. So, long answer to your very good question. I would say it's a combination of everything. And now the amazing part is Joe Sacco, who was with Cassidy and with Montgomery now. Maybe he melds in some of their philosophies, but also, let's not forget, he was a head coach of the Avalanche, so maybe he's got his own ideas on maybe how to jumpstart things.
Yeah, very true. Good point on Joe Sacco. He's been there a while, but still, wasn't he there with Claude Julien as well?
He might have been, yeah.
He's like the tail end of it, but now this is, 4 coaches now under the Don Sweeney era because he fired Julien, now he's fired Montgomery and Cassidy, and now Sacco. I mean, eventually...
Well, I think Chiarelli was the one who may have dumped Julien.
Okay. All right. But I know Sweeney...
The others were Sweeney, yes.
Yes, because he was part of that infamous, 2015 draft. And I know a lot of people say, oh, well, you can't keep harping back on it. Well, we do it in the NFL all the time. We say, oh, this draft, that draft. What if you did there? Well, you have to look at it. You had 3 first-round picks. Right. And you don't do anything with them. Now, look, Jake DeBrusk has turned into a good NHL player. He's not with your team anymore. But the other 2 first-round picks are not even playing in the NHL, and that should have set up your future.
Well, let me qualify that by saying a couple things. First of all, that was Don Sweeney's first draft.
Yes.
So I'm wondering maybe they should have let somebody else handle it. Okay, that's number one. Number two, they tried like hell to try to move up to get Noah Hannafin, and they weren't biting. It was Calgary ultimately.
Yes, that's correct.
So they weren't biting. So that's number two. And number 3, yes, Senyshyn, he may be in witness protection somewhere, but let's not forget Zboril was actually starting to come on. I mean, it was a little slow, but he was making progress. I think his second or third year in the league, Jim. But then he was concussed, and really since that point, didn't return to that form with the Bruins. They ultimately let him go. He's kind of bounced around a little bit. So out of those 3, you could say they maybe hit on 1 1/4 or 1 1/2. So, and it's so tough. And then, of course, people are always going to remember who was drafted after that.
Yeah.
You know, the Barzals, the kid from Winnipeg, Connors. Kyle Connors. So, and then I counter with that. I go, yeah, well, then the next year or so, how did like 15 teams miss on Charlie McAvoy? Or how many 24 teams missed on Pasternak? So it all kind of comes around. By the way, I think Carlo was drafted in that 2015 draft too. But your point is well taken on that. And they tried like hell to get Hanifin, but it just never worked.
Yeah, no, I know. And it's a great debate because everybody says, oh, you got to have your draft pick should be performing now in the NHL. And I was looking at the subsequent drafts too. Like Ryan Lindgren was a guy that the Bruins took and they traded him in the Rick Nash trade. Imagine if that doesn't go down and he's part of that future with McAvoy. Again, that's a lot of what.
Oh, by the way, not to interrupt you, but Sweeney even said, Jim, at that time, he says, watch this guy come back to haunt us the next 10 to 15 years. And he's been a very, very good defenseman for the Rangers.
No, absolutely, 100%. I wanted to run this one by you, too. It felt like the Ryan McDonough move that the Montreal Canadiens made all those years ago when they sent him down to New York for Scott Gomez.
Oh, my gosh. Or what is it? Jonathan Drouin, which didn't he wound up getting moved for Sergachev.
Yes, that's correct.
Right?
Yeah.
You know, how'd that turn out?
I mean, you can always play what ifs with these drafts, but I was just looking at it, and under the Don Sweeney era, like you said, you could throw Zboril in there, so I guess that's up to 7. I counted 6 guys that have actually made it to the NHL right now. And later drafts, we can't really evaluate because guys come along, slower. Patra was up here last year. Now he's developing in the AHL, and that's fine. That's where he needs to be. But again, like I said, it goes back to the first question. It's like, okay, yeah, it's your coach, but the GM's putting everything together, and the culture in that room seems to have changed. It's all about me and not about the B.
You know what? I don't know if I would dismiss that. I mean, let's face it. When Zdeno Chara and Patrice Bergeron were around, it was clearly us. You conformed in a different way. You did it the Bruins way, if you will, almost like the Patriots way, as it was said when Brady and Belichick were up there. So I don't know if it's a bunch of me guys. I just think it's become, though, and I've wondered this aloud, Jimmy, that, and Brad Marchand, you can make a case when he's done, maybe a Hall of Famer. I mean, he was a 4th liner when he came up, and then he ascended to be one of the top left wings in the game, one of the top agitators. I just wonder if his heart is in it being a captain. Maybe it was just forced upon him because he's basically, the last sort of link to that 11 Stanley Cup team and the ones that made the finals. So maybe he was just thrust into a role he didn't want. It could be that, but I always say too, you always got to hold the other guys responsible. And who was also there during the Cassidy and also now Montgomery era in terms of the players. Remember, there was a bunch of them that said supposedly Cassidy was too hard on him, and maybe it was DeBrusk that was kind of leading the charge there. But now, Coyle's been there, Carlo's been there, Marchand's been there, McAvoy, Pasternak. There has to be the proverbial a little blood's on their hands. So it makes you wonder, too, if it's them. And then I've always said this, too, Jim. I think the Bruins, and like other teams, too, maybe, when you have as few picks as you do, you still have to hit. And you still have to have a philosophy on how to develop players. And what I don't see, and I've harped on this even when they were going really good, is you've got to put skill and development in there. You've got to have guys that are able to finish. I know think it was Bruins Network that posted up a video yesterday. The kid the Bruins got in the first round this year, Le Tourneau from Boston College, big kid, ton of size, can't finish. The cynics are saying, he blends right in with the Bruins. So, although he's a raw freshman, I mean, I'm half kidding when I say this, but that's kind of the philosophy, Jim. You got to develop guys that have skill and finish, and I'm not sure they do enough of that, and that's where I'd really like to see maybe a change of philosophy a little bit. More skill guys, and I think the character. Now, I don't want hoodlums playing for the Bruins, but I also want to see high-end skill guys that can finish, and I don't know if they have enough of them on the pro and the other levels.
No, I agree with that. I think so, too, and it goes back to the culture for me because I'm like looking at it from the outside, but seeing it, like you mentioned,
me too,
the guys looking, as well as you are, just looking at it, you see what happened in Winnipeg I'll say it now, when Blake Wheeler was gone and Blake Wheeler was there was something that wasn't working between the coach and the players. Once he left, Adam Lowry, captain, everybody starts to buy in. They're playing well. Do the Bruins almost need like a shakeup like that, or do we try to keep that core together and try to win again? And I also agree on your point with Marchand and captain. I saw it in New Jersey with Patrick Elias. When he became captain, it just didn't fit who he was.
Right. It was like being forced on him, and he didn't want to do it, but because he's either the elder statesman or the franchise bearer at that time, that's why he was thrust into that role. If you're going to move anybody, I don't think Pasternak's going. I think the one guy you do take calls on is Charlie McAvoy. And it almost seems sacrilegious, but still, people who, again, I respect and in my own eyes have seen this. He is at the good to pretty good plateau, but he's not that Drew Doughty type that I thought he was going to be. He's way too reticent on the power play. I mean, if you're going to be one of the anchors on the first power play, Jim, obviously you got to set your guys up, but if there is a chance to shoot, you have to shoot. He's reticent to do that. At times, I see him kind of going through the motions. So if I'm looking for a shakeup, that might be the one value piece. Just spitballing out loud, obviously, you'd have to have a salary for salary type deal. I just threw this out to one of the people I was interacting on X at Zig Sports Voice. Like, for example, they play Utah tomorrow night. And Nick Schmaltz is a guy that I think could use a change of scenery. And maybe a defenseman like Valimaki. I think if you add both their salaries, it could be in that park where McAvoy would be. That would be something like the Bruins, what they, or any team for that matter, would have to do. Almost salary for salaries.
That makes sense. And what about, like, I know there's been contract negotiations or discussion, depends on who you talk to, right? With Marchand. Is that somebody you would like to see them bring back, or would you be okay if they decided, hey, you know what, maybe we have to start moving on from some of the past that's been there?
That's a good question. And, a lot of people view him as obviously a forever Bruin. And if he did leave, he would still be welcome back. It's one of those things where a guy leaves for a year or two, maybe trying to win a Stanley Cup. And you can't blame a guy like Ray Bourque did that. He was Mr. Loyalty and high level for over 20 years, and he saw the end coming of the Bruins around 1999 and 2000. He asked for a trade. He got it, but he's still revered as a Bruin. Marchand, that would be, to me, a similar case there. If it's me, Jim, I would have a real tough conversation here. My inkling would be this may be the tip that we need to start over, and maybe we need to move on from the past. And again, he's been, a top shelf Bruin, probably going to get his number retired one day. He and Bergeron were such a great combo for a lot of years. I might have to give that some serious thought about them moving on from him.
No, it's just, you just bring it up because I see the quotes coming out from the press conference today, and Sweeney's like, guys that want to be here, we'll keep, but guys that don't, we'll move on from. So it's like, okay, culture change is coming from somewhere, but still, you have, under this regime, you have one Stanley Cup final, you lose. Now, again, everybody can play revisionist history. If they win in 2019, all right, this is going to be rolling. but they didn't, and they lost on home ice, and they lost badly on home ice.
Well, I would say though, if you go, and I actually watched this not too long ago, Binnington was ridiculous.
Oh yeah,
in the first period. I mean, he had like 18 saves, and at least 8 or 9 of them were point blank. What did them in, of course, was, and we just talked about Marchand, his ill-advised change at the end of the period that led to the second Blues goal that really deflated him at that time.
And you could see in that game, and that point, you knew the game was over.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. I've watched this team for over 50 years. I've seen a lot of heartache, believe me.
No, but I mean, the Bruins have always been that staple. And you said it before, the unsettledness in the offseason. And I've heard Kevin Weeks say it. I've heard a lot of other people say it too. Un-Bruin-like. The contract negotiation with Jeremy Swayman, so public. Just everything, it usually was behind closed doors. You mentioned it, coming into camp, everything's unsettled. It's like, okay, but who allowed that to happen? Was that on the coach?
Right, or did, some other people that are tied in with the Bruins, some friends, if you will, did they get this out? And also, too, let's not forget another aspect of this. The Ullmark trade. You dealt away the best goaltending tandem in the league last year, but from the Sweeney standpoint, Jim, and the cap standpoint, you had to do this trade because there's no way you're putting in. Well, it would be, even if you signed Ullmark to an extension, that's at least $15-16 million to the goaltending position, and Linus is also north of 30, so they had to move on from that. And hell, I'd argue Korpisalo's actually been better than both of them if you really look at the numbers. Korpisalo's been pretty damn good. Kastelik has been really good on the fourth line. And they got back into the first round, and I still think this Letourneau kid's got promise. And I was just kidding about the comment I made earlier because he's got the size, and obviously he's a third-line center on arguably the best college team in the nation. So, but they had to make that trade. But you wonder too the psychology of Swayman playing hardball on the contract, also losing his best friend to a trade. You and I aren't in the locker room. None of us are. Does that kind of weigh on him? And does he still have, as it's been reported too, Jimmy, does he still have sour feelings about having to go through the process? Yeah, he got his money, but I was hurt in the process. Only Jeremy Swayman could answer that.
No, 100%. And again, you bring it back to similar situation with Elias Lindholm and Nikita Zadorov. You're coming to a brand new situation, new system, new area. It does take time to adjust, but right. I agree with the general manager. The grace period should be over of timing to adjust.
Absolutely. And again, Lindholm's, ideally he's a second line guy, which leads you to believe then maybe Boston overpaid or they don't have that front line guy. So, but if you can do it by a committee, then it would be good. I mean, I think the effort's been there. It's just not he's delivering the results. And Zadorov, the one guy, Jimmy, I wanted instead, because I wasn't totally on board with this. I wanted Brady Shea instead, but then he went to Nashville. But I'm like, what do I know? But, Zadorov needs to really start. I think he was too aggressive, too many penalties. Now he's kind of dialed it back. I think even Don said today they need to have that sort of aggressiveness, but this time stay out of the penalty box with Zadorov,
Yeah, one more before we jump around the league a little bit on the Bruins. With Joe Sacco coming in, do we expect the coaching bump like in the first game, or how long do you think this is going to take, and the combination of like styles that we can see under Joe Sacco?
I think you'll see a bump. Like I mentioned, Utah coming in to TD Garden tomorrow. I think they've been a little bit struggling themselves, so I think you always get a little bump the first couple of games. I noticed reading different things on Twitter today about how they seem to have a little more energy, and with Sacco, I mean, he's been a fixture with the penalty kill, and they've been a wreck this year. So does he have to tighten things up more there? They need a ton of work on the power play, but we'll see. I think on the specialty teams tomorrow, Jimmy, we'll find out what impact it is. If they could start killing penalties like they used to and then start scoring some power play goals, then maybe that bump is more pronounced.
I agree with that. You mentioned it off the top. Alex Ovechkin, the race for Gretzky's record. Unfortunately, he's week to week right now with a lower body injury. It's unfortunate because he was on a tear. I think he had 15
he
goals.
Was 25 all over again.
I felt like it, right? Like every time, he had a down year, 20-something goals. Next year he's just pop 40 again. Right. And he went 5 goals, 2 games, 15 goals in the first 18 games. Felt like he was going for back-to-back hat tricks, and then he gets hurt. But how remarkable is it what he's doing at 39?
Very. And I feel bad for the kid from Utah. It was a totally accidental collision. I mean, there was no maliciousness to it, so you always feel bad for the player involved. But it seemed as though Alex was finding a little bit of a renaissance. I mean, you look at this Capitals team, and we've talked about the Bruins extensively, but basically other than, Carlson and maybe Tom Wilson, they've pretty much got a different team now than the one that won the Stanley Cup. Was it back in 2018? So, I didn't think much of them this year, but man, some of the moves that the GM made there, you made the offseason trade for Chychrun, Logan Tom. I think they may be the only team I remember, Jim, that has 2 right-handed catching goalies.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Thompson.
It's been a while.
And Charlie Lindgren, who I've been a fan of from his days at St. Cloud State. I thought he was a really nice goalie there. So I didn't think much of them, but McMichael has been very good. Some of their other component parts have been good. Unfortunately, Oshie hasn't been able to play, but they've been a surprise, and I think maybe Ovi, even in his older years, probably felt like a little bit of the fountain of youth because of some of the moves the Caps made. To me, they've been a bit of a surprise this year.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I had liked the Caps offseason, and I thought they would be a force in the Metro. I mean, not too much of a force, but they know how to beat the teams there, like the New Jerseys and the Islanders. It's always competitive in that division. Goes back to the old Patrick division days when everybody was together. So I'm like, I'm not going to dismiss the Caps here. And like you said, the fountain of youth with Ovi, and now he's rejuvenated, scored power play 5-on-5. I'm like, okay, this team, and they have the better depth. Dylan Strome taking it, run. And I think the most underrated move was the Logan Thompson, because I think their goaltending is finally settled.
Yeah, I agree. Anytime you bring in a guy with, the success that Vegas has had. And yeah, it'd been kind of a shuttle for them. I think they thought enough of Lindgren to keep him around, obviously, but is he like a true number one? I'm not sure about that. Thompson's played in enough big games, and yeah, I'm with you there. I thought that was a very solid move by Caps management.
What are your thoughts on the start for the Winnipeg Jets? I mean, unbelievable, right?
Watched that game last night. They got some sweet revenge in the Paul Maurice Invitational. Now, how weird was that? I guess it actually was a home and home if you think about it, because I think the last game was down in Florida. So it may have kind of worked out, if you will, as a home and home. And they were much better this time at home. I thought Florida took it to them in the first meeting. But, boy, you watch them, Jimmy, move that puck around. That's what I'm talking about. The skill, Morrissey, Connor. Scheifele looks like he's found himself again. And Scotty Arniel, I've known from his days in Buffalo, has really done a nice job. I thought the Pionk trade with Trouba a few years ago, I thought Winnipeg got the better end of that deal. Like his play. They just seem to be, I don't know, maybe just more relaxed playing, more confident playing. Hellebuck certainly looks like, the Vezina guy that he was a few years ago. But as well as I do, Jimmy, as good as it is now, can it translate to the postseason? And we know Winnipeg's had some issues there.
Zig, you're absolutely right. And I got to say one more thing on Winnipeg. How about the trade by Kevin Cheveldayoff getting 4 components for Pierre-Luc Dubois to really set up the success for this team?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I mean, what was it? Was that the Velarde trade, I think?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Get a couple of assets there from the Kings for a guy who, quite frankly, maybe now he's found a home in Washington, but here's a guy with a ton of talent, but you get a reputation for if you're, slacking off or you just don't put the effort in, he had that bit of a reputation. It seemed like wherever he was. So that was a hell of a trade by Cheveldayoff. And again, to get those component pieces from the Kings, very smart move for the Winnipeg Jets.
Speaking of, you mentioned Florida, LA, teams like that. What other teams that you said Washington was a surprise team for you? Any other surprises for you to start the season team-wise?
I gotta think about that for a minute. That's a really good question. Maybe a little bit Minnesota. I mean, I thought they could be a competitive team. John Hines is a guy I'm kind of on. But, boy, the way Kaprizov has really started this season, he's been just an absolute animal there. So getting them going, watched a little of their game the other night. So maybe a little bit. I thought the way Calgary started the season, they were quite a surprise, but I think they've kind of leveled off the play a little bit. But interesting to see about them. So, and, maybe I thought, maybe a negative surprise a little bit. I thought Montreal might be a little bit further along, but
yeah, me too.
Right? Because you still wonder. I mean, you're trying to be patient. You've got a plan to rebuild and everything like that, but this just seems to be taking a little bit too long. So you got to wonder, if the management there, Marty St. Louis, if the Molson family decides, you know what, we need to move this along here a little bit in Hockey Mad Montreal.
So I got a hypothetical for you. Maybe not so much of a hypothetical. Could you see Montreal adding Jim Montgomery to the bench to help Martin St. Louis out?
Why not? He's a Montreal native. He'd be going home. Why not? You have a fresh set of eyes. Your most storied rival. Almost makes too much sense, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, we've seen it before, right?
Why not? Hey, if the guy can go out and Jim Montgomery's going to be behind a bench again somewhere before too long. He's too good of a coach, too good of a man, and we all know he's overcome a lot of struggles. So I'm rooting for him. I really am.
Me too. I really like, and I agree with you on Montreal. I think they should have been a lot further along. Now, granted, like if you look at the standings, only several points out, but it feels longer than that because they have a lot of kids playing on defense. They're not consistent enough. You hear it right. It had to be in the mix. Can't be out of it. Similar to what you hear with Ottawa, Buffalo, all those teams just seems like it's always, they're just stuck in that same spot.
Even when they change players or have premium draft picks or whatever, they're like stuck in neutral for whatever reason.
No, it's true. And hopefully Montreal can start to like build on some things because it feels like when they have to play a team that is going to embarrass them, they step up like they did the other night against Edmonton.
He looked good the other night, right?
They looked like, okay, this is the team we all expected to be like the entire year. But no, but look, again, it's a long season, but as the old phrase go, it's getting late early, as Yogi like to say.
And I like to quote all the time. It's one of the greatest 2 or 3 lines of all time, and it's so accurate.
Well, we can say that in Pittsburgh and Nashville, right? I mean, Nashville, especially what they did in fantasy hockey July 1st, and now they're struggling. And I mean, look, they're starting to bounce back a little bit, but the fact that Barry Trotz already wants to like call for a rebuild and threaten with a rebuild, it's like, all right, what were we doing?
I'm not, and I think I heard Elliot Friedman talk about this. I think maybe that was a wrong choice of word, maybe like a refurbishing, because they already had, with Yossi, and they committed a lot of money to Saros, and you got Forsberg already there. So you already have 3 pretty good components. And then you add Stamkos and Marchessault and Shea. I mean, you would think, my gosh, this team should be, at least competing for the division. And again, it's early yet, and you've got guys who've won a lot of games. So maybe, the second half, Jim, they start kicking it up. But, I was a little surprised, too, how Nashville's kind of stumbled out.
Are you surprised, Tampa, how good they've been to start the year?
Yes and no, because obviously they've had some losses, and that's going to happen in the salary cap era. You're going to eventually have your core depleted to a degree, but any roster still has Hedman, still has Point, still has Kucherov. still has Vasilevsky. Yankees had their core four. Tampa's got their core four. You try to surround them a little bit with some younger players and everything like that. The Gensel lad I thought was really good for them. So, and with John Cooper running that organization, I can't be overly surprised because I've always admired the way they do business.
And I mentioned Pittsburgh before. Mike Sullivan, Penguins defensively, they look broken. It reminds me of that stretch after they won the Cup in 2009, from like 2010 to 2016, right before their back-to-back runs. Their defense just didn't felt it was broken, and it feels like it's broken again.
It does, and again, they made the big splash to bring in Erik Karlsson, who to me has not looked anything since his days in Ottawa, whether it was in San Jose, whether it was now in Pittsburgh, just does not look like the same defenseman that he was. Letang, God love him, is a Warrior, is probably going to make the Hall of Fame. But yeah, after that, they don't have a whole hell of a lot of depth there. And that's an organization, too, that could they have traded Letang? Could they have traded Malkin? Because you're not trading Crosby, and maybe they could have been in their rebuild. But that's what happens. Teams like Pittsburgh, teams like Boston, you go for it year after year after year. You sacrifice those first-round picks, and then, oh, geez, all of a sudden we're not good anymore. What do we do? So, and you wonder, too, in their particular situation, you've got the Fenway Sports Group that owns them. I'm a little concerned, Jim, when, they also have their hands in the fire with the Red Sox, their soccer interests. You start to, at least to me, and maybe I'm out of left field here, you wonder, where's the primary interest? Is it going to be the Penguins or the Red Sox or their soccer or whatever the case? And I guess they're interested supposedly in buying the Celtics. So you wonder, when there's a conglomeration like all that, maybe you could speak to the Devils thing, because obviously they're owned by the guy who owns the Commanders and the 76ers. Is the commitment there? I just always wondered about that.
It felt like Josh Harris and after, with Blitzer and everything, I think the commitment is there for New Jersey, because this offseason they did go for it. They went for it, then they did more than, and I think Harris saw that. I think he was like, okay, we took a step back. We need to be better. Let Tommy Fitzgerald do what he needs to do. Let him go make the moves that we feel are necessary to win. Yeah, they're down. But look, again, they're doing well. Commanders are doing well. New Jersey, I guess you can
Sixers are a train wreck.
Right. So I guess maybe that dipped, right? Yeah. They have interest everywhere else, and that team dipped. Their primary team, which they had originally had before they bought the Devils, and you're like, okay, so that might have dipped. But yeah, it is weird, because I've heard the same things out of Pittsburgh. Like, I don't know if this is such a good idea to have everybody come in. And then when you're hearing, oh, well, the commitment's to still win with those guys, but try to be competitive. Well, you and I are both on the same page with this. 2022, the summer, Chris Letang or Evgeny Malkin, pick one, not both.
Right. Yeah. Gosh, I'd almost have to pick Malkin, because him and Crosby,
yeah,
dynamic duo.
It is. It's a great duo.
You'd probably get more out of from Malkin than you would Letang, but.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think, they have tradable assets, but again, it's just tough because the team's older, and what are they going to do? And everybody's like, oh, Sid's got to get out of there. Everybody's got to realize his contract extension hasn't even kicked in yet.
Yeah, right.
His extension didn't even kick in yet. I understand it. It would be great. Like, for me last year, I was like, oh yeah, if he goes to Colorado, that's great. He gets to play with Nate McKinnon.
Right.
Does he really want to?
Does he? Yeah, or does he want to be part of the rebuild? Does he feel maybe obligated in the sense of, all right, I know we might be bad, but I'm the leader. I got to set the next generation here. This is how we've done things in Pittsburgh, and maybe be that veteran hand. That's going to be a tough decision for Penguins management, for Mario Lemieux and company.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of Lemieux, he was there when Crosby came in. And I think, and maybe that transition is playing a part into why Crosby decided to stay. I don't know. I'm not there. Again, I'm not in the room. But again, we're just talking here out loud.
Absolutely. And again, you've got the the one icon with another. It's going to be a tough decision there in Pittsburgh. Now, would we all vilify Crosby? No, because he's done everything he can with that Pittsburgh organization. Maybe he still has the itch to want to win. Again, only Sidney Crosby knows what he wants to do.
Zig, this has been a great conversation. Wish we had a little bit more time. I know you're a busy man. What's coming up on your programs?
Jimmy, I appreciate it. Of course, you mentioned Wednesdays. I'm on Sirius XM NHL Network Radio, Channel 91 with Mick Kern. Dryden versus Cheevers. Of course, he was a big Canadiens fan, big Bruins fan that I am, so always enjoy that. That's during the season. Got updates, top of the hour on our platform of Sirius XM channels tomorrow and generally Wednesday, but I'm actually off today. So Wednesday, Thursday, Friday between 1 and 7 Eastern. So if you tuned into NFL radio or Mad Dog or NHL, you'd hear a whole sports update. Mad Dog Sports Radio, 1:30 to 6:30 Eastern. You can actually get to chat with the great Christopher Russo. And then on Saturdays in season, the End Zone, 5 to 8 Eastern, Channel 88, the Sirius XM app. And then with Matt Sims, Phil Sims' son, following Sunday Night Football on Channel 88 in the Sirius XM app.
Zig, always a pleasure to talk hockey with you, football, whatever the topic is. Thank you for coming on the Full Press NHL podcast today.
Anytime, Jimmy. Anytime, man.
Guys, get it. iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Also up on YouTube, Full Press Hockey Podcast. Guys, take care and enjoy.
Barry Trotz, Nashville Predators, making sure you're listening to Full Press Hockey Podcast.